Our last discussion was we were speaking about good and evil. And we cited verses that evil, God does not release energies to create evil. Good, of course, the David HaMelech says, Yotze or Yotze Tov Ubore Choshech. He created darkness. Darkness is a creation. It's a state of being. Then when God withdraws from existence, the result is evil. And I gave examples of that. But in terms of goodness, when we do acts or deeds which are worthy of a relationship, God releases energies which allows us to be beneficiaries of our actions, which is a relation with God himself. But evil, distancing, not. I'll give you an example. The Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us, Habod l'taher Messiah. So if you want to purify yourself, God will intervene and give you divine assistance to help you out. Habod l'tameh posenlo. If you want to sin, you want to contaminate yourself, God says you're welcome to walk out the door. God's not involved. God doesn't push you off the plank. He doesn't push you off the gangplank. You want to walk out the door and go into free fall, that's your prerogative. God does not participate in that. But if a person is drowning and you want to live and you want to be productive, God will throw the lifeline and hoist you out of that quicksand, out of that ocean to save your life. Because you want to be productive in your life. Many years ago, it was my first major class that I gave for women. Really the second a separate group of women. And it was a class I would give every Monday night when we were at 61st Street between Madison and Park. And I had a group of women used to come and we studied Chumash. And the women, majority, I'd say all of them were not observant at the time. Many of them became observant as a result of this class. And after the class was over, every time, it was from 6 to 7, and I would stop about 10 to 7, people would ask questions about their own Judaism, understanding concepts, what could they do if they want to advance, and they would consult with me, and they would speak to me, okay? And many people took my advice, and they integrated certain, whatever may be in their lives, which assisted them to do better in what they were doing. There was a certain woman, she was single at the time, and she comes over to me, and she came from a very, very wealthy family. She was single, and she was orphaned as a teenager. Now she's a woman in her upper 20s, and she comes to me with a claim. All the other women you talk to, you consult, you advise them. Me, you don't pay attention to. Why? That was a complaint to me. So I say that many times in the past I attempted to help you, and you had no interest. These other women, they're interested in really making advances, in growing and understanding Judaism better, but seemingly you have no interest. She said, "How did I show that?" So I said to her, "I once asked you if you liked Shabbos candles before Shabbos Friday night. And you said to me, based on your schedule, that you shop late and you do this, you can't light candles Friday night. If lighting candles Friday night is too difficult for you, what does that say? It tells me you don't want to make an effort as much as an iota, even to begin the climb. You don't want, you're not interested. So if that's the case, that's the reason why I don't even attempt to advise you. Because it's clear from your position where you're at, everything is just too much. These other women, whatever I tell them, it's not only not too much, they want even more of it. That's why I don't advise, and the others I do advise. She took it so badly, she didn't speak to me for about 5-10 years after that comment. Because when you tell the person, there's an expression in English, the truth hurts. Once you heard the truth, we all try to, in our own minds, we delude ourselves. The reason why I'm this is because A, B, C, D, and every reason under the sun. Rather than looking yourself in the mirror and say, you know who the culprit is. I'm the culprit myself. What I said to her then, she's the culprit. She cannot pin this on anybody but herself. Therefore, she's responsible, and she carries full liability for wherever she's at. What is that? Abod l'tamei posin lo. You don't want to be observant. God's not going to push you out the window. He's not going to push you off the roof. You want to go off the roof? You have no interest? He'll let you walk off the roof. See, he's not involved in evil, creating evil. Evil, the person himself is involved in that process. You want to do good, you do an action, God provides you with all the means to advance, because every action has a reaction. And the reaction there is God gives positive energy, which allows you to be drawn up and to be motivated and begin soaring and become empowered to deal with all the issues, whatever the issues may be. That's the difference. God creates evil. You want evil, go do it. I'm not part of it. Therefore, as we say in English, the way you make your bed, the way you sleep. There used to be one person, Yad Avram, many years ago, he used to always come up with these quips. You sleep with dogs, you get up with fleas. I should really quote the person by name, Nachum Tisser. You sleep with dogs, you get up with fleas. I knew I'd get a smile on Robbie's face on that one.
Yeah.
We spoke about the 3 periods of time. There's the 6,000-year period, which we live in right now. The world was created nearly 6,000 years ago. Physical existence is meant to exist for 6,000 years. At the end of 6,000 years, David HaMelech says, King David says that a day by God is 1,000 years. So if we have 6 days of creation, and on the 7th day, God ceased being creative, that means each day corresponds to 1,000 years of existence. Right now, we're in the 6,000th year. At the end of the 6,000th year, God ceases to be creative. What happens? The world ceases to exist. It goes back to pre-existence. However, all the people who existed during this period of time, if they're worthy, they're going to be resurrected, and they're going to be living in a context of spirituality with their bodies, because they're resurrected. The resurrected bodies themselves are physical, except the soul functions purely as a soul. And the Ramchal explained, during this 1,000 years, which the world is fallow, it's fallow, it says the souls are given wings and they fly. So he explained that means they transcend the physical. Being associated with the body doesn't in any way impair the function of the soul. The soul fully functions as a soul, no less than it functions in the world to come, except it's an expanded, a magnified soul. However, the body has no influence on that soul, which the body does when we live. We always have some degree of minimization due to our physical existence. But in this 1,000 years, God gives us wings. We're able to ascend above that the body, the physicality of the person doesn't impinge or infringe on any part of that function of the soul. In this 8,000th year, when God recreates the world, it's a new setting to function. Now you function body and soul. It's integrated now. Once God integrates the soul into the body is pure matter, and the soul is at a magnified level, which is not to be fathomed how magnified it is. It totally subsumes the physicality of the body, and now the body, which is physical, there's no trace of it because it's been spiritualized to a degree that it's not noticed any longer. The person functions as this physical, spiritual being, fully in a spiritual context. That's what the world to come is. What we call Olam Haba, the eventual world to come that will be for all eternity, which God, we all will have a relationship with God at whatever level we achieved in our lifetime. That's the Ramchal. I once mentioned, we find that Sarah Imenu, Sarah, the founding matriarch of the Jewish people, the mother of Yitzchak, she lived till the age of 127. And the Torah tells us, Sarah Imenu lived 720, 100. That's the way it expresses it. She lived 120 years, and then it says, Elu Yimei Chayei Sarah. She lived 120 years, and this was the life of Sarah Imenu. So there's an obvious question. We know there's nothing superfluous in the Torah. If the Torah is telling me she lived 127 years, isn't it obvious though that's the lifetime of Sarah? If you live 127, that's as long as you lived. So why does the Torah have to conclude? And that was the life of Sarah. So Rashi cites the Midrash that although Sarah had very difficult times in her life, she was taken by the king of Egypt, and he wanted to defile her. And the many times where her husband went to battle, her husband was thrown into the kiln. She had very many traumatic moments in her life, but looking back, all the years she saw through only a positive lens. That's what it concludes. This was the life of Sarah, as her life was seen only in a positive way, despite all the seeming pitfalls that she experienced. However, the Orach HaMakodesh says something interesting. There's a question in Midrash, how many years was Sarah meant to live? Was she meant to live 127 years? And her life only came to an end because she was informed that her son Yitzchak, which was her only child, was slaughtered by her husband, and this was given to her, this information was given to my Satan, but he didn't finish speaking, but it's something she imagined. It was too much for her to deal with. No, she was meant to live many years longer, except her life was cut short because Satan shared this information with her. And she couldn't, it was too much for her to tolerate. She expired. So what the Torah is telling us, if a tzaddik was meant to live, let's say another 50 years, but for whatever reason, God takes him earlier, is he accredited for the years that he didn't live? So what the Torah is telling us, he is. Because the tzaddik, if he would have lived those years, he'd be no less of a tzaddik, he'd be more of a tzaddik. As a result of that, the Torah is telling us, although she lived 127 years, Eli Mechai Sarah, she's accredited with all the other years she didn't live as she did live. You understand? Although you didn't, God accredits you as if you did live those years. Person is living as a proper Jew. What happens when Mashiach comes? Mashiach comes based on the verse in Prophets. It's called, these are days which have no value any longer. Because all evil will be expunged from existence. Let's say before the year 6000. Man will no longer be inclined to do evil. Our only interest is to what? To do the will of God. 24 hours a day, 24/7, every moment. That's our interest. So if that's the case, are you accredited for doing good during those years? Because you're no longer challenged, there's no longer choice. The answer is you're not, but based on this principle that we just said of the Orach HaMakodesh, Rabbi Shol Salanter says, if you would have lived during those years with the challenge, what choices would have you made? You would have made positive choices. So in terms of to be accredited when you do it at that with that level of gusto, when there's no evil inclination, that you're not accredited. But you are accredited that if you lived during those years when evil still existed, and you would have chosen to do the right thing until the end of time, as long as you would have lived, you're credited with those actions as if you did the actions within the context of free choice. You understand? As a result of that, it's the same concept what he says regarding Sari Megan. Although her life was shortened at the age of 127, but the years that she didn't live, if she would have lived, she would have been no less a matriarch. Therefore, she's fully credited for those years. So the years that we live and we should merit Mashiach, we will have no choice any longer. But since if living as a appropriate Jew, we would have made the choices to do the right thing during that time, at least minimally you're credited at that level because you would have chosen to do the right thing.
Question, Rabbi.
Other times, there's a principle known as onus rachmana patre. If a person, let's say, doesn't do a mitzvah because it's beyond his control, he's not able to do the mitzvah. A person, let's say, is incarcerated. He's not able to do the mitzvah. Is he accredited for doing the mitzvah? As we're saying now. Seemingly will, because if not for the incarceration, it's no worse than dying, correct? It's no worse than dying. He would have done the mitzvah if he would have been in the position that he could have done the mitzvah. What about a person becomes a Baal Tshuva later in life? And for the first 50 years of his life, he didn't observe Shabbos, did not put on tefillin, did not say Shema. And he does tshuva. And God forgives him for everything. So on his record, there's no negative recording that he ever failed. But is he accredited for doing the mitzvah? The negative may be removed from the record, but we can't put a positive on the record. Factually, he didn't observe Shabbos for the first 50 years of his life. Or he didn't put on tefillin, didn't say Shema, didn't eat matzah at the Seder. Accredited, he can't be accredited. Is he forgiven? Fully forgiven, fully reinstated, because he was sincere in his remorse and his commitment for the future, and he maintains that. But now there's a new question. We say where a Baal Tshuva stands, even a person's a tzaddik all his life, there's a certain aspect of the Baal Tshuva's life, qualitatively, it's beyond a tzaddik. Why? So there are a number of ways to understand it. Rambam explains, even if a person is a sincere, devout Baal Tshuva, he understands he still has skeletons in his closet. Your past is still part of your present life. So all the demons that haunt you, that try to distract you, to pull you back to your past, are there. So the challenge the Baal Tshuva has is much more difficult than the challenge that a tzaddik has. Because a tzaddik never developed those bad habits or took those foreign substances which keep trying to pull him back there. So based on the principle of the challenge being a greater challenge, the Baal Tshuva's accomplishment is a greater accomplishment. When he eats the matzah, when he puts on the tefillin, when he says the Shema. So does it compensate qualitatively for the mitzvah he didn't do, although he's not accredited for the mitzvahs until he was 50, but now when he does the mitzvahs, because the challenge is more difficult, maybe to a degree it compensates for the mitzvah he didn't do earlier. So qualitatively, this one mitzvah may be the equivalent of many, many mitzvahs, maybe years worth, although he didn't do it then the person who does it naturally, because he didn't have the negative challenge that this person has. So it's literally a consolation for the person who's about tshuva. So not only is he in a good place, but based on the principle as the Rambam explains it, that the challenge for the Baal Tshuva is always more difficult until he dies because of his past. Qualitatively, the value of his mitzvah is a greater value.